We've been speaking about the ultimate purpose of man is to perfect himself, and has one perfect himself by doing good. What is good? Good is not what we believe is good. Good is an absolute. What we believe is good may not be good. What we believe may be beneficial may not be beneficial. I always say to people, what is good? But what I think is good. And what is bad? What you believe is bad. People believe in God. And I said, how does God impact on your life? Well, because God wants me to do good. Has God ever told you what good is? God has never communicated with you what good is. Well, it's my own understanding. But maybe what you believe is good is not good, and what you believe is bad is not bad. It's not negative. Maybe it's positive. So again, who sets the parameters of what good and what and evil is? Only God, who's the creator of the human being and creator of everything, understands and knows what's good for us and what's bad for us. Especially regarding our soul, which is the core of our being, which is the only component which is part of eternity, which is relevance to eternity. What gives us relevance to eternity? What infuses us with a level of perfection, of goodness, that allows us to cleave to God? Only God knows. And that's really the basis for the positive commandments at Sinai. Those positive commandments, those are infusions of good. The negative commandments, that's what minimizes us and causes us regression and deficiencies, and that distances us from what good is, and does not allow us to have relevance to the ultimate good, which is God himself, which is the absolute. So just as God is absolute in what he is, he communicated to us at Sinai a prescription of life, which the result of those actions either bring about absolute goodness or absolute evil. Good is being able to cleave to God, who's absolute, in good on the absolute level. And evil is what? Is detaching yourself from what's absolute good. That's evil. And those are the negative commandments. If you partake or participate in the negative commandments, those are don't do's. Don't do connotes. If you do that, it's not in your best interest. It causes a distance. That distance causes evil to what? To impact you and to affect your reality of being. This is the general concept. Now, you have a coal mine, and the coal mine is 10,000 feet below the ground, and the deeper you go into that mine, there's less air, there's less oxygen, and there's more coal dust. And as a result of that, being less oxygen, the further you go deeper, the more toxic it is. As you come up closer to the surface, you have less coal dust, you have more oxygen, and things are healthier. When God created evil, God doesn't fund evil. He created such a thing known as evil. Now, he created the human being with a core which is in its essence good. You can either inflate that core or you can deflate it. Inflated means you rise. As you rise, you have relevance to goodness. As you go down, God is not creating evil. You're going into an abyss, and the deeper you go into that abyss, the more you become impacted by that evil. But it's there. Good is something you create. a person goes into free fall. You have to do nothing. You just keep falling lower. But wherever you fall into a location which is not in your best interest. To rise, you have to take an initiative to create and invested energy which brings you up and brings you into an area which is beneficial to your essence, which enhances your essence. That's the concept of good and evil. You're a beneficiary of your initiative in the positive. You're a victim of your action in the negative. Because you're allowing yourself to be exposed to things which give you relevance to whatever is detrimental and destructive to your being. That's evil. This is the general concept. From the moment we're born, we're in an environment with all kinds of negative influences. The question is, do we partake of those negative influences? We have an inclination which draws us naturally towards those negative influences. It's called inclination. It's called the evil inclination. We have an inclination which is evil, which causes us to be inclined to that. As we mature and become people of greater intelligence, greater understanding, and you take control and understand what's in your best interest, you go against the grain, you go against your inclination. I mentioned the Midrash. Chazal Midrash tells us that the wise as they get older get wiser, and the fools as they get older become more foolish. Not they get older, as they age. The wise as they age become wiser, and the fools as they age become more foolish. What does that mean? Even a person who's into the physical life, he wants to partake in a very serious way of material and physicality, almost borders on heathenism. It was up to him, he wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. It was up to him, he'd sit out in the restaurant from morning to evening, eat to his maximum, and do other things, to take it all in. But he realizes, as we say in Kemach Torah, if you don't have the means to acquire the material, you're going nowhere. So a person, as much as he's inclined to many things, and he prefers to do it differently, he's forced to assume a level of life of responsibility. He has no choice. As much as I want to behave foolishly and irresponsibly, but if I want to exist and advance myself, to be able to provide myself, I have no choice but to go against my inclination and to act responsibly. I have to get myself an education at a certain level. I have to look for a position that I should earn a living, because I have to provide for myself and my family and for my needs. If you'd have it without going to work, you'd prefer that, but that's not the reality of life. So a person, when he's young, as foolish as he may be, as much as he wants to partake of a hedonistic life, he's forced to assume a level of act responsibly. He has no choice. So when you're young, even the foolish person has to act responsible, because if he's not responsible, he can't exist. And he can't even accommodate what he wants to accommodate, because the man doesn't want to become a criminal, because a criminal has certain consequences and very serious ramifications that you pay the price, and he prefers not to pay that price. So therefore, he acts responsibly to be a self-earner and to be a person maybe of integrity for the same reason. But as you get older and the abilities start waning, or you succeed to a degree that you no longer have to work. So as you advance this person in the material existence, what happens to you? You become, as you age, you become aged, you become more foolish. Because now that you no longer have the ability to act responsibly, to assume certain responsibilities, what are you left with? You're left with your inclination. That's what you're left with. So what are you? As you age, you become more foolish. Because you no longer have what holds you back from that foolishness, because you don't have the ability to go against that foolishness, because either you have what you need, or you no longer can provide for yourself. The wise person understands the upside and the downside. He wants nothing to do with the downside. He only wants the upside. But reality is we are physical beings, and we have certain energies. We have chemistry. That chemistry, as a young person, makes life much more challenging. We have drives, sexual drives. We have ambition. We have ego. We have everything. All these drives, as much as I understand cerebrally, intellectually, that it's not in my best interest to be drawn after that animalistic drive, which we all have, but it's just the reality. So every one of us, especially when we're still fully functional, we all have conflicts of interest. We're conflicted. As much as we want, but simultaneously, there's an undercurrent of that of that inclination. And the inclination is overwhelming. You have to tear yourself away. But as much as you try to tear yourself away, simultaneously, you still have that undercurrent that's pulling you to that location, which you know is not the right place for you to be. But because of that conflict of interest, we rationalize and we delude ourselves very often to minimize the negativity of whatever that may be. And we cross the lines we don't cross. But as you get older, where all those drives start waning, you don't have those drives. And you've conditioned yourself despite those drives all along. The conflicts of interest are no longer there, or they're at a minimal level. Because the conflicts of interest are minimized, because those animalistic drives, the sexual drive, the ambition, the ego is minimized. Now, what do you have? You have greater level of clarity. As a result of having a greater level of clarity, as you age, you become more aged, you become wiser. That's called sage wisdom. Person has sage wisdom. When you become older, if you have wisdom, it's sage wisdom. The Chinuch tells us that even a person never learned, never studied. The Torah tells us you have to acknowledge an elderly person. You should, not where he's an evil person. No, you should, but why should I honor him? Why should I acknowledge him? Why should I give him his due respect? So the Chinuch, who's one of the codifiers, explains, because there's just lessons of life. Person who's lived a life, and he's a good person there, basically. He's not learned, but if he's an upstanding human being, he lived his life appropriately. He has many lessons takeaways he learned in life, and he can give you good advice because he understands what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So even though he's not book learned, school learned, none of that, but there is a certain, what we call the school of hard knocks, that he understands what is correct and what's not acceptable. So there is what you could learn from this elderly person. He has that the knowledge of just life itself. Therefore, you should acknowledge him, that aged person, because he possesses that natural wisdom which comes with life if you live life as an appropriate human being. We speak of an upright citizen. Upright citizen, he lived, never stole, never lied. And that person lived that kind of life, although he's a simple person, maybe even a simpleton, but he sees things that a younger person doesn't see. Because of those conflicts, the drives, the energies, the ambition, the ego, we don't see it. somebody once said years ago, going back in the late 50s, the 60s, when a boy was bar mitzvah, usually people would get multiple gifts and they were all the same gift. And the main Jewish publishing house of Jewish books, which were printed in Hebrew, like a Siddur, a Chumash, and other books that were printed in English, were printed by the Hebrew Publishing Company. It was a company called Hebrew Publishing Company. It was on the Lower East Side on Delancey Street. They used to publish. So there was a book they used to give to bar mitzvah boys. It had hardcover. It had like a paper outer cover. It was called Jewish Folklore. There were all kinds of stories in there, little tidbits of folklore, different stories, fables, Jewish fables. So one of the stories there, interesting story, it always stuck with me. A person himself had many issues. And he went to the Hasidic rabbi, and he says, why don't I see things clearly? Why do I always make all the mistakes I make? So he says to the person, I want you to come, I want to show you, explain you something. And he looks in the mirror and he says, what do you see? He says, I see my own reflection. I see exactly what I look like. Then he takes him to the window. He says, look out the window. What do you see? He says, I see a world. So why, when you look in the mirror, you see yourself? And when you look out through the clear pane of glass, transparent, what do you see the world? What's the difference? He says, the difference is because on the mirror, there's silver behind that glass. So because of that silver, you only see yourself. The plain piece of glass, which is transparent, has no silver. So when you see that silver, all you see is yourself. The glass, you don't have the silver, you don't have that conflict of interest, therefore you can see the world. So the more you see it for yourself, the less you see others. The less you see yourself, then you can see others. That was the fable in this book. Understand? When we're younger, ambition. You want to burn the candle at both ends. You want to take the world, take the bull by its horns. You're going to make an impact. You're going to make a difference in society. You're going to do this. You're going to change everything. Not so simple. When you're younger, you believe that. Because that's the drive. You're driven by ambition, by ego. I want to be acknowledged. I want this, I want that. As you get older, either you come to the realization it's not happening, or you come to the realization that's not what it's all about. That's not what it's all about. The wiser the person becomes, it's not what it's all about. Not what it's all about. The more altruistic objectives than that. As a result of that, that person gains wisdom. Therefore, the wise, as they age, they become wiser. Because they were always looking to do the right thing, to advance. King David says, and we read in Pirkei Avos, says, Ezu Chacham, who's a wise man? Halom Mikol Adam. You can learn from anyone. And it cites a verse in Tehillim, which David says, Mikom lam hiskalti. There was no one I can't learn from. You can learn from everyone. You can learn from a worm. You can learn from an ant. You can learn from a cat. Certain characteristics, certain behavior patterns, whether it's zeal, whether it's modesty, whatever it may be, whether it's being responsible. Many things you could take, the takeaways. But people gloss over many things. Why are they glossing over? I should learn from him. It's beneath my dignity. I don't value that person. There's no takeaway. Even though you can learn tremendous things from that person. There's a famous story. I'm not good at Hasidic stories. Just not my personality. So there was, I forgot who it was. This person was traveling late at night, and he comes into town and he sees there's a shoemaker. and the light is on in the shoemaker shop, 3 o'clock in the morning. And he goes and knocks on the door, and the shoemaker is still fixing shoes. He says to the shoemaker, "Why don't you go to sleep?" He says, "You realize that, at one time, a person who had a candle, it had great value, because without a candle, you couldn't work at night." So he said to this great person who asked him the question, he says, "As long as the candle burns, I work." That was his response. If the candle goes out, I have no choice. I have to go to sleep. But as long as that candle burns, I toil, because that's earning a living. When this great person heard this response, here, as long as the candle burns, I toil and I work, because that's what it's all about. This person had a charge of energy. He says, something? I learned something from the shoemaker. As long as you're alive, the whole world's is at your beck and call, or you have opportunity, you can make choices. God forbid, the moment life's over, that opportunity, whatever it was, is over. As long as the candle burns, you toil, you take initiative. Once a person's incapacitated, God forbid, even if he's still alive, how effective could he be in terms of his purpose, in terms of his objective in life? Give you an example. Chazal tell us, what's the difference between a chacham and a navan? A chacham means a person that's knowledgeable. A navan means a person who has a depth of understanding. So it explains it with an allegory. A person has 1,000 coins, and he wants to quantify and understand how many coins does he have. So what does he do? He has 1,000 gold coins. He counts the coins, 1 to 1,000. He has 1,000 coins. But he doesn't have an understanding of to take value and turn it into greater value, because he doesn't know how to enter into commerce. To understand what the value of that $1,000 is worth a lot more than $1,000. Because a person who has the knowledge of how to do business, he can take those 1,000 coins and turn them into 10,000 coins. Because it's not only he knows what he has, he knows what he can do with that. A chacham is a person says, I know what I have. Person's the walking encyclopedia. You can't ask him anything, he'll give you the fact. But with that information, what does he do with the information? Just an information trove. That's all he is. He's a repository of information. But a person who has an understanding of that information, because he understands that information, when he sees other things, he's able to take that information and extend it beyond the limitations of that information. That's what it's about. Person works in a certain job. Wall Street person. He's an analyst. Analyze his stocks, does his due diligence. He retires. What does he do? What does he do with that mind, that analytical mind? Shuts it down, does other things. What does he do? Travels, takes it easy, retires. Basically, that ability becomes dormant. It's dormant. Takes the back burner. It goes into what they used to call the mothball fleet. Mothball fleet. They used to take the frigates and the battleships that goes to the mothball fleet. Eventually they scrap it. Goes into scrap. A person whose mind is active in a very constructive and creative and effective way, as old as he is, as long as he's still functional, he's always, because he carries a sense of responsibility and a sense of purpose until the day he dies. If he can't do it himself, he'll delegate, he'll advise other people and offer his sage wisdom to others how to better their lives. So the person really is a committed Jew, committed. And you understand we have responsibility to ourselves and to God. and to Jews. And the Jewish people are far from perfect. We have many issues, whether they're spiritual, whether they're financial, material, we have many issues. How many people recognize the seriousness of those issues? If a person has a financial problem in his business, could he sleep at night? He can't sleep at night. Why? Because he understands that if his finances are unstable and everything's at risk, at stake, he can't sleep at night. He's working on coming up with a solution. I'll give you an example. We have an 80% assimilation rate among Jews. We're pretty smart people. How many people can't sleep at night because 80% of Jews are disappearing through assimilation? So people, it's not because it's beyond their scope of ability. They don't even think about it. They're not touched by it. All they think about is their own personal lives. They don't think beyond themselves. A person who has relevance to greatness, he thinks about things beyond himself. He thinks about those things. He'll discuss it. Are there solutions? Is there an approach? And he discussed it with the experts. And they said, you know something, maybe those people are beyond our grasp or our ability, but we have to shore up the core. We have 80%, 20% that are still committed, and we have to strengthen that to expand the 20%. That what happened to 80% is not going to happen to those 20%. And we have to grow it. Now, how do you grow it? What precautions do you take? What innovations do you have? How do you guarantee the future? That the future should not be a future what happened in the past. There's a word for Rabbeinu Bachio. Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, and something, this is the first verse he teaches a child when he begins speaking, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha kilas Yaakov. The Torah was commanded us by Moshe, is the heritage of the house of Jacob. That's a apostle, it's a verse of the Torah. So Rabbeinu Bachi asks, why doesn't it say Torah tziva lanu? Instead of saying Moroshe Kilas Yaakov, Yerushas Kilas Yaakov. It's the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. What is the meaning of Morosha? So he says, Morosha means, Yerusha means I have an inheritance. If I have an inheritance, it's mine to do as I choose. Do I have a responsibility to secure it for the future generation? The answer is no. If I choose to leave it for my future, for my heirs, I have a right to do that. And I choose not to, I don't. What about if something's given to you to use yourself, but it's on the condition you pass it on and secure it to make sure that your heirs have it? That's called Morosha. When God gave us the Torah at Sinai, it's not only for us. It's anything within our scope and our ability to guarantee its perpetuation into the future, until the end of time. So we have to do and discuss and address every issue to guarantee its perpetuation. That God forbid, it should not be compromised. It should not be infringed upon. It should not be exchanged for anything but what it is. That's Morosha. A person who understands what Morosha is, and you understand what the responsibility of a Jew is, it's that Torah is not only for you to have a big peace in the world to come. That's not what it's about only. It's what God wants. The end result is you'll have that big peace in the world to come. But how do you get it? By assuming responsibility to do what God wants to do. So the mind is not consumed with yourself, with your limitation, but it's with what? With others. And I think about others. The mind is always active, and therefore you can't sleep at night. People say, so when are you going to retire? Never. Never going to retire. You may retire from a position, but as a Jew, you never retire. Whatever's within your ability, you're always there to your best ability, fully engaged. There's no time out. There is no time out. You're allowed to take time out to relax, to sleep. You have just to exist. to recharge your batteries to go further. But if you really understand what the objective of a Jew is, it's that every minute you're given, it's for a purpose. And the purpose is what? What the prophet says. It's for my glory. You exist for my glory, whatever that takes. Maintain, be healthy, to be able to function, to be able to do for my glory. So even attending to your own physical needs, that's for my glory. But after you have tended to it, and you have all that energy, and you have all that ability, you have that understanding, where do you put it? Do you put your head in the feed bag or the trough? Or do you take it out and look at the world and say, what's going on? And if you can make a difference, you're going to make that difference. That's what we're talking about. So good is doing something to be worthy to have relevance to the good that's absolute. God gave us something which is absolutely generates good. It's called his will. It's called the Torah. That's the Morosha. That's the heritage of the congregation of Jacob. The positive, negative commandments, our responsibilities to one another, to perpetuate, and we only merit, which we'll discuss tomorrow and the future days, that energy, it activates energies which empowers us, and we become empowered. Because we assume that role in life, God keeps funding that fund. He expands the fund. He gives you every amenity to make sure you guarantee, based on the level of investment you have in that direction. A person has to pay taxes. And the government takes a hefty piece. You have the federal government, you have the state, and you have the city tax. Before you turn around, they're taking a very significant percentage of your earnings. So if there's any way you're able to, even legally, to have an exemption, you want to take advantage of the exemption. Legally, you speak to your accountant, and your accountant advises you exactly, what you could, what you can't. But he says there's a certain loophole, which it's not so simple. It's a gray area. I really don't know if you should rely on it, because ultimately it'll raise a red flag and you may be called in for an audit. And as a result of that, you never know what the outcome will be. You could have a penalty, and a penalty to a serious penalty. You may even be accused of something which borders on the criminal. Who knows? I would advise you, it's best, play it safe, don't go for it. But he says, but how much can I save? He says, you could save yourself 40% on your tax. And we're talking about a significant amount of money. He says, I think I'll take that chance. That I won't be in any way called in, won't be audited. I'm not going to have all those problems. And then he is called. In retrospect, now he says, I'm so greedy. If I would have understood and taken the advice of my accountant not to rely on it, I wouldn't be in all this hot water now, all this trouble. But let's say from day one, he would understand, no question. Anybody who's relied on this was always called in, audited, penalized, penalty, and worse. Would you rely on it? Not for a moment. You wouldn't. There's no basis to rationalize. Because if you understand the consequences, in reality, you don't rationalize. You don't delude yourself. Shmuel, you there? Okay. If a person is in an environment when nobody's looking over your shoulder, when I'm saying not that people look over your shoulder, it's not conducive for spirituality. So as a result of it, everything becomes very gray, because you don't feel the spirituality in your life. Therefore, when things seem to be a little foggy, unclear, you don't see the definite consequences of your behavior. And therefore you say, I'll take a chance. But if you understand taking 2 steps, you're off the cliff, and you understand 2 steps, you're off the cliff, you're not taking those 2 steps because you understand the consequence of taking those 2 steps. If you live in a certain environment where the environment represents the Torah represents mitzvahs. It has the feeling of spirituality. You're sensitive. So therefore you have the sense, you don't delude yourself. There's no base to delude yourself because you have a sense and a level of clarity of what's right and what's wrong. Therefore, you don't fool yourself. You most times, we're only human. So we make mistakes, but you make less mistakes. There's less of a basis to have those conflicts of interest because you see it more clearly. Shmuel, this is what I'm answering your question.